Are you bored of games or looking for a game to play while you're bored? Board games. I've been sent over 3 board games from Steamforged Games to take a look at, and honestly I'm quite intrigued to actually play them because they seem like really interesting and fun games, 2 of which are crossovers, which is always fun. So we're going to take a look at each of them now and what they are, and then we'll cut to later where I've actually played them and can give some thoughts on what they're like. So the first one we have is Medici. You are buyers for different merchant houses in the competitive but profitable age of the infamous Medici family. Every day you go to the wholesale market where you expect to find the finest cloth, exotic spices, grains from the rich fields abroad, colourful dyes, lush furs, and rarely, gold from mines far across the waters. So this game is probably the simplest of the 3 that we've got, but it looks really fun and seems quite fast-paced. It's 2 to 6 players, and it is roughly 60 minutes in estimation. So, you know, an hour is pretty short for a board game of this style. And it looks quite nice, I think. It's got a really nice style to it, and I'm intrigued to be a merchant. Then we have crossover number 1, Sea of Thieves. What is it? Voyage of Legends. I knew that. So, Sea of Thieves, obviously, it's a pirate game, but a board game, I'm quite interested. There's not enough pirate things out there. There's very few pirate games, so I'm interested in having something in that theme. So this one is 2 to 4 players and is approximately 90 to 120 minutes. So a little bit longer, but in terms of ease of play, it seems quite simple. It doesn't look like it's going to take too long to learn the rules. As you can see, it uses like hexagonal boards and a lot of different cards, and is kind of encounter based and randomized in how you move. So I'm quite interested to see that. It seems like it's a bit longer, but it will be simple and fast paced. Maybe it won't. I don't know. But we'll find out. You'll find out very shortly. I'll find out whenever I can gather the people to play this. So that's the second one. I'm quite interested in that. Sea of Thieves. I like the game. That almost fell off the table. And finally, oh boy, the biggest of the bunch is Dark Souls, the Sunless City core set. Dark Souls is an already existing board game. I have the original Dark Souls board game, which is huge, and it took a while to play, honestly. The other Dark Souls board game, when I did play it, it was a huge setup. We had a huge table, like one of those wallpaper tables, like just got that out, super long. It was so fun to set up though, a big dungeon. But the rules, it was complex, you know, it was a difficult one to learn. And as such, we were sat there for about 8 hours. But good news, this one is longer. It doesn't actually estimate 6 hours, it estimates 120 minutes to 150 minutes. So it is the longest of the 3. If it's anything like the other one, the rules are probably going to take a little bit of time to learn. It also has these really cool miniatures that it comes with. The other one also had a bunch of these, so I had them on a shelf for the longest time, and I really want to paint them, right? But it's got more of those, Ornstein's Smaug, some of Gwyn's Knights. It's really interesting. It's got different characters you can play as. You've got 3 classes, the Herald, the Pyromancer, or the Warrior, which is, I believe, slightly different. There were 4 classes in the other board game. The Warrior might have been one of them, but they were varied. And as such, this is 1 to 3 players. So you can play it on your own, which I quite like. I think that's really fun. You can just sit down, set it up, and just play through a dungeon, and it's going to be quite difficult. But that's Dark Souls, you know? I'm gonna set aside a whole day, just in case. Don't fall off the... Okay, that one's heavier. That one's not going anywhere. So those are the 3 board games that we've been sent. Sea of Thieves is already out, so you can go and play that one now. But I'm very interested to see what they're going to be like. So for you, it'll be just a moment, but for me, I'm going to try and find some people to play with and drag them into hours of board games, which you know what? That's fun. That's not bad. Anyway, I'll be back in just a moment to give you some thoughts on these after I've played them, which is right now. Is that what I did for the transition? I don't remember, honestly. Hello, it's me, Spectral Voice from the future, and I have now played these games to give some further thoughts on them. And oh boy, there's a few thoughts. There are a few thoughts. So we'll start off with Medici, which is, out of the 3, the simplest board game here. in the fact that it is very much a classic board game and just has exactly what you would expect. It's easy enough with 2 players, but this game is going to benefit much more from a full party of 3 or 4. Yeah, Medici is a lot quicker to play. It's much more of a classic style board game that can be opened, learned, and a game played in just over an hour. What the game is, you are traders, and so each player will pick a character, and then you will have tokens assigned to that as well as a ship, and there'll be a board in the middle that will have the amount of florins that you have, the currency that you use, on the outside, which is where you place your ship to show how much money you have. And then the inner part of the board itself is to do with the different goods that can be purchased. So cloth and furs and spices and wheat and dye. There are tokens directly in the middle to dictate what day it is. The game will last 3 days, and essentially what it is you have a deck of cards, and the players will take it in turns to draw cards. You can do up to 3 a turn, and they will resemble goods with a value on it as well. Each player then will get to do 1 bid on those goods, and the highest bid wins. You don't get to continue bidding, so it is only 1. So if you really want it, you have to use a little bit of strategy in how much you bid, especially if you don't want someone else to bid higher after you. So there is a tactic there to do with how much money you have and how much you're willing to spend for what it is you want. This keeps going until all but 1 player has a full cargo ship. The remaining player then will take cards from the top to fill the remaining bit of their ship, so that could be in your benefit if you are the last player. And everyone will return with a full ship, as long as you don't run out of the actual cards for auction, which if people keep passing on the goods and don't want to bid on them, then you can run out. At the end of each day, you will then tally up the values on the goods you have, as well as the amount of goods you have, and move yourself up on the board in the middle, which can give you bonuses for how much money you earn. Now, each day is very quick to do, and as I said, the game only takes 3 days, so you'll be done quick, and it'll be over, and the player at the end of it with the most florins is the winner. It's very simple, it's very easy to learn, it's very quick, but I do love how much strategy there is in this game. You sit there, you can look at the board, and you can think, do I want to bid on these things, considering the value, what you already have, what your opponents already have, and what it will do for both yourself and your opponents in terms of placement on the goods board. Honestly, 3 to 4 players seems like the better direction for this one, adding a lot more of that strategy in the way that you have to consider bids and your next move in order to maximize the profit you'll get and potentially stop your opponents from getting too many benefits. But it is easily doable with just 2 players and is just as enjoyable. It's honestly such a great game, and I can see myself picking up this one in the future quite a bit when it comes to pulling out a board game to play with some people. That is just easy to learn, super fun, and very quick. Medici is great. I love it. I definitely recommend Medici for just all kinds of players. And then we have Sea of Thieves, Voyage of Legends. This one actually surprised me a little bit with how complex it is. So it's a tile-based board game in which you build the map using the tile sections, and depending on how many players and what sort of thing you want to do, you can build it in different ways. But it is very much a tabletop RPG, or at least it requires that experience if you want to learn it quickly. It takes a fair bit of time to learn, and I did sit there for quite some time trying to pick apart everything that it was saying, with quite a lengthy rulebook and reference cards and just a lot of pieces and tokens. It is a heavy token game. It is fantastic for fans of Sea of Thieves though, and the fleet management mechanics are done quite well. It essentially becomes a turn-based game where you have to take your actions, then go through phases, and then keep attempting to overcome the dangers of the sea as you plunder on voyages for more loot to trade at the outpost, at the risk of losing it all should your ship go down. And in terms of the actual turn-based system, the actions are quite complex in themselves. So when it is your turn, you can do certain things on your action, such as setting up tasks for each of your crew, which you'll have little ship cards where you can see everything in your fleet, including like the crew, the water level of your ship, depending on how much damage it's taken, and some extra little bits you can put on there, as well as the action points per turn. So you can do tasks for the crew, you can then take an action which you can choose to do different things to do with sailing, repairs, bailing the water out, or plundering where you are. I feel like if you're coming from a background of TTRPGs, and even if you're familiar with something like D&D, it's going to be a lot quicker to learn and it'll be very familiar in that aspect. But for general board game playing, it's going to be quite a difficult one and will take a lot more time to learn. It is easy enough with just 2 players, but this game is going to benefit much more from a full party of 3 or 4. You'll just have to learn the ropes first, but if you're familiar with TTRPGs, then you might find it a little easier, but honestly, it's still pretty great. I still have to sit down and learn it quite a bit more, as well as do some of the more in-depth games for a longer period of time with more players and try and just get to grips with some of the later mechanics in it, and it does take a bit of time, so I imagine at the moment, until I'm really familiar with it and until the other players are really familiar with it, it will probably tick over the estimated game time quite a bit. But I really enjoy it. I think the amount of depth that it does Sea of Thieves justice really well. It is a fantastic fleet management game where you want to try and get treasure, become a great pirate, and it's got a lot of different tokens and cards and equipment and upgrades and a lot of stuff that you can do. So I think in terms of in-depth tabletop RPGs that you want, that are not going to be ongoing campaigns, but instead just something that you can sit down for quite a bit, but wrap up all together, it's a fantastic board game in that sense, but probably not for every single type of player. If you want just a more casual pirate game, this one isn't going to do it. And then, oh boy, we have Dark Souls, the Sunless City. This one is even more complex than Sea of Thieves. Now, if you have played or seen the Dark Souls board game from a few years ago, this is in the same vein as that. It's the similar kind of system, but it is a core set. So the Sunless City is not an expansion. It is a standalone thing. It's its own thing. You don't need the previous game, and you don't need the experience from the previous game. I have the previous game and have played it, which took 8 hours when we did that. It was learning it for a long time, trying to figure it out, and again, it's very much a tabletop RPG, much more of a D&D style dungeon crawler, but there's a lot of difficulty there. Being Dark Souls, it makes it very hard, which means you have to do well, otherwise a mistake will mean starting over again. And this is very much in the same vein. That said, they are excellent. In terms of the spectrum of games we have here, it is easy, medium, and hard. This Dark Souls one is a fantastic board game, but it is a big one, and it will take a lot of learning, a lot of practice, and a lot of games before you even begin to get good at it or do anything successful. But I love it. If you just clear off a huge table and set up the little boards with the dungeon and then just use all the little miniatures, it's such a fun time, and it's such a good way to use Dark Souls in the tabletop world. And as a fan of the previous board game, this extra one is a great standalone edition, and I love it. But it is the most difficult one here to recommend, as well as to play. If you're willing to put in the amount of time it takes to learn it, because even with the estimated time it says on there, it will be hours of learning it, and then hours of playing it to try and get to grips with it. So with that in mind, if that sounds good to you, it will be good. It will be fantastic. But this is definitely not a game for everyone. In the same way that Dark Souls itself is difficult to recommend because it has such a curve of difficulty to it, the board game is the same in that aspect. So I encourage giving it a go. but it is a lot. So if you want to dip into tabletop RPG aspects of a board game, but maybe that's a little bit too daunting, that's where I think something like Sea of Thieves comes into play. But if you want the really basic kind of much easier to learn and really fun to play, then Medici is great for that. But if you want something that is a lot more complex, will take a lot more time, and can potentially be ongoing if you have the space to leave it set up and come back to it, then Dark Souls, the Sunless City is a great means to do that. And if you enjoy that, I absolutely recommend picking up the original board game as well, and a whole bunch of the expansions that they brought out, because there are some great things there. Especially the Black Dragon Calamite expansion. I don't have that one, but I just want that for the model alone. I think I probably will paint these models at some point, honestly, they are great. But the game itself is fantastic. Models aside, it's great. I love all three of these games, and I think they are the perfect range of easy, medium, and hard. It's a good learning curve example of different board games and how deep they can go. And so to that extent, if you are looking for a new board game to pick up and you know what kind of one you want to aim for, any of these is going to be a great pick.